Dr. Poe, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to talk about spirituality. I think you've already demonstrated the relationship between spirituality and suicide, but let's talk about spirituality in relationship to suicide.
Okay. Well, spirituality is considered to be one's relationship to God or one's relationship to God by whatever name. Some people refer to God as Allah, some people refer to God as Krishna. The Christian refers to God as the Lord Jesus Christ. So spirituality refers to one's relationship with God, and that doesn't necessarily include any particular religious tradition. We do know, the research does show, that the more spiritually focused a person is, the less likely that person is to harm themselves. And I think that I think part of the reason for that is that each of us were created by God, and each of us were created with a mandate, I think, to serve God, to obey God, to live a life pleasing to Him. And when we go against God's plan for our life, okay, which is that we practice loving one another as He loves us, one of the consequences is guilt. And guilt unresolved becomes despair. And despair has to do with feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, powerlessness, and oftentimes the wish to die. Now, when a person is in a condition of despair, they very often become depressed. In some cases, they may become paranoid. In other cases, they may develop an anxiety disorder. Almost always, they have very low self-esteem. And that means that they feel very inadequate or inferior. And of course, that adds up to emotional pain. And oftentimes then, persons who are in despair, and because they are in pain, they develop the thought of ending their life because they want to put a stop to the pain. So, but we have to go back and ask the question, well, what caused the despair? What caused the emotional pain? Well, it was the lifestyle. It was their self-centered lifestyle. Now, it is also true that if you're abused, persons who are abused in their childhood, especially sexual abuse, and by the way, there's a high correlation between suicide attempts and persons who have been sexually abused in their childhood, in their adolescence, as well as in their adult life, okay? But let's go back to a major cause of despair then is my own self-centered behavior, my own self-centered lifestyle, and in some cases being abused by other people, okay? On the other hand, just because I've been abused doesn't mean that I'm going to be in despair, because the person who turns to God, even though they've been abused, they can overcome the damage that the abuse has done to them. So it's not necessarily so that if a person has been abused, they're going to attempt or commit suicide, okay? But that does end up being a precipitating factor, that is being abused.
Now, Dr. Poe, when you talk about despair, it seems that you're talking about a progression of events that would eventually lead to what might be considered the ultimate negative, which is what? Despair. That it does not, a person contemplating suicide does not start with despair. He starts at an earlier stage, and that he actually evolves into eventually despair. Now, what's the earliest stage that you would identify as bringing on that kind of attitude?
Very good question. I think the earliest stage in the progression, in the development of despair, is excessive fear. Have you ever noticed that when a person is thinking about doing wrong, they get scared, and after they do wrong, they get scared? Is that correct? Fear of getting caught, right? Okay. So I think that wrongdoing, and by wrongdoing I mean going against the will of God, mistreating somebody, thinking that I'm superior to other people, that's wrong, okay? Talking down to you, that's wrong. Stealing your money, that's wrong. Overcharging you for goods and services, that's wrong. The result of that is excessive fear in my mind.
That you'll be caught.
That's right. Excessive fear I'm going to be caught, but I also think that there's just fear that somebody also is going to do to me what I've just done to you.
Okay.
All right? In any event, excessive fear follows wrongdoing. Excessive fear also follows being mistreated, okay? As long as that, if that excessive fear remains unresolved, I believe it turns into grief.
Good.
Okay? And grief, if it remains unresolved, I believe turns into despair. And when despair develops in the mind, then it's going to manifest itself in one of many different ways. Depression, anxiety, paranoia, high blood pressure, okay?
All of those are elements of despair.
I think
When you say a person is caught up in despair, you can almost identify some of the things that he might be affected by.
Right, the despair may manifest in so many different ways, because I think that if I'm in despair, I'm also in a condition of rage. And rage does not sit too well in the mind. It will damage the mind, the thinking process, it'll damage the functioning of the body. And one of the manifestations